The Weaver's Daughter.
In the heart of the kingdom of Ethelgard, where the mountains touched the sky and the rivers sang a constant melody, there lived a girl named Ilara. Her home was a small cottage nestled on the outskirts of the town of Silverwood, a place known for its rich wool and the master weavers who worked it. Ilara was the daughter of the kingdom's finest weaver, a man whose hands could transform a simple thread into a tapestry so vivid it seemed to breathe. He was a kind and gentle soul, and he taught Ilara everything he knew. By the time she was a young woman, her own skill with the loom was remarkable. She could weave the sunrise from golden silk and the night sky from threads of deep indigo. But this peace was not to last. Her father, consumed by a sudden fever, passed away one cold winter's night, leaving Ilara to fend for herself. Shortly after, her stepmother, a woman named Helga, arrived with her two daughters, Greta and Agnes. Helga had been a distant relative of her father's, and with him gone, she claimed ownership of the cottage and the workshop. Helga was a woman of hard edges and a heart as cold as the mountain winds. Her two daughters were just as unpleasant. Greta was a tall girl with a sour expression, her face a perpetual scowl. Agnes was a squat, round girl whose only skill was complaining. They both looked upon Ilara with disdain. "This girl smells of sheep," Greta would say, wrinkling her nose. "And her hands are so rough from all that work," Agnes would add with a shudder. Ilara was stripped of her life of comfort. The loom, which had been her solace and her passion, was forbidden to her. Helga declared that weaving was a trade for a man, and that a lady should be concerned with more refined matters. Ilara was instead forced to become a servant in her own home. Her days were filled with drudgery. She woke before the sun to tend to the fire, fetch water from the well, and prepare a meal for her stepmother and stepsisters. While they sat at the breakfast table, laughing and gossiping about the latest court intrigue, Ilara would be in the back, scrubbing the floors until her hands ached. The loom stood silent in the corner of the workshop, draped in a heavy cloth to hide it from Ilara's sight. She would often steal a moment, just a single moment, to peek beneath the cloth. The sight of the polished wood and the intricate gears would bring a wave of sadness over her. It was a constant reminder of what she had lost. One evening, as Ilara sat by the hearth mending a tear in one of Greta's dresses, Helga entered the room, a letter clutched in her hand. "The royal announcement has arrived," Helga announced, her voice filled with a giddy excitement. "The king is holding a grand royal gala in honor of the crown prince's birthday. All the noble families of the kingdom have been invited." Greta and Agnes shrieked with delight. This was their chance to escape the quiet town of Silverwood and find a husband of high standing. "We must have the finest dresses," Greta exclaimed. "And the most delicate slippers," Agnes added, giggling. Helga turned to Ilara, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You," she said, pointing a finger at Ilara, "you will not be attending. You will stay here and clean the house from top to bottom. It must be spotless by the time we return." Ilara's heart sank. She had no expectation of being allowed to attend the gala, but the pronouncement still hurt. As the days passed, her stepmother and stepsisters were consumed by preparations for the event. They were constantly demanding that Ilara run errands for them, fetching silk from the market and thread from the merchant. She watched them from afar, as they tried on gowns that were more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The dresses were made of fine brocade and adorned with intricate silver embroidery. Finally, the day of the gala arrived. Ilara's stepmother and stepsisters were a whirlwind of activity, preening and primping in front of the mirror. They wore their new dresses. Their hair was adorned with ribbons, and they carried fans decorated with painted birds. "Don't wait up for us," Helga said with a sneer as they departed in a hired carriage. "We will be dancing the night away." Ilara was left alone in the silent cottage. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She walked into the workshop and pulled the cloth off her father's loom. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, and for a moment, the cottage seemed to fill with her father's gentle presence. She felt a familiar warmth, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. Ilara stood before the silent loom, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. The cottage was steeped in a suffocating silence, a stark contrast to the lively clamor of the gala she was forbidden from attending. She felt a profound loneliness, a weight on her shoulders that was heavier than any chore. Driven by a sudden, desperate impulse, she reached for a spindle of her favorite thread, a shimmering silver as bright as starlight. It was a leftover from one of her father's grandest projects, a thread he had always kept separate from the others. She knew it was foolish, but she had to feel the familiar comfort of the shuttle in her hand, the rhythm of the loom. As she began to weave, something remarkable happened. The moment the first threads intertwined, a soft, ethereal light filled the workshop. The silver threads hummed with an almost magical energy, and the pattern she was weaving began to take on a life of its own. It wasn't the simple cloth she had intended to make. Instead, the threads wove themselves into a beautiful gown of woven moonlight, decorated with tiny, luminous stars. Alara gasped, her hands hovering over the creation. The gown was weightless, a shimmering cascade of fabric that seemed to shift with every breath. As she worked, she felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't just a dress. It was a piece of her father's magic, a gift from the loom itself. A small silvery white bird fluttered from the depths of the weave, a tiny glowing creature that landed softly on her shoulder. "You must go," it chirped, its voice like the gentle tinkle of a bell. "This night is for you." Alara shook her head. "I can't. My clothes are rags and I have no way to get there." The tiny bird chirped again, and with a flash of light, the worn, simple dress Alara was wearing transformed. The fabric became a rich, flowing satin, dyed the color of a twilight sky. Her worn shoes turned into delicate, embroidered slippers that fit her feet perfectly. The little bird then led her out to the back of the cottage. There, sitting where a pile of old lumber had been moments before, was a small, elegant carriage pulled by 2 snow-white doves. The tiny bird looked at her and said, "The magic will last until the last star fades from the sky just before dawn. You must be back before then." Alara's heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. The fear of being caught warred with the desperate hope of seeing the world her step-family had tried to hide from her. She stepped into the carriage, and the doves took to the air, soaring over the moonlit fields toward the castle. The doves carried Alara swiftly through the night, a silent, feathered blur against the star-dusted sky. Below, the kingdom of Ethelgard unfolded like a vast, dark tapestry, its rivers shimmering like silver ribbons in the moonlight. As they neared the castle, she saw the lights from the great hall, a beacon of gold and warmth. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was a simple weaver's daughter, dressed in magic, flying in a carriage pulled by doves. It felt like a dream. The carriage landed gently at the foot of the castle steps, just behind a long line of ornate horse-drawn carriages. Alara stepped out, her feet barely touching the ground. Her new slippers were light as air, and the dress flowed around her like a living shadow, sparkling with every movement. A footman, accustomed to the grandest arrivals, bowed low, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion at the sight of the dove-drawn carriage. She walked into the ballroom, and the music, a lively waltz, seemed to quiet just for a moment as she entered. All eyes turned to her. She saw her stepmother and stepsisters standing near the refreshment table, their faces a mask of annoyance as they sized up the new arrival. They had no idea it was Alara. Helga sniffed, whispering something to Greta. "Who is that girl? She has the look of a field mouse who's wandered into a feast." Alara ignored them, her gaze sweeping across the magnificent hall. Tapestries of knights and dragons adorned the walls, and chandeliers glittered with 1,000 candles, casting a golden glow on the dancing couples. She felt a profound sense of loneliness amidst the grandeur, until her eyes met those of a young man standing on the dais. It was the Crown Prince, Lord Alaric. He was not what she expected. He was not dressed in the usual stiff royal finery, but in a simpler tunic of deep green, embroidered with a subtle, intricate design. His dark hair was a bit disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. His eyes, the color of warm honey, held a look of gentle curiosity and a quiet weariness. He was watching the dancers with a detached expression, as if he were an artist looking at a painting that was missing something. When their eyes met, a spark ignited. A silent message passed between them. He excused himself from the group he was with and began to walk toward her. The crowd parted around him and a hush fell over the room. Alara's heart pounded. She should have run. This was all a terrible mistake. But her feet, as if guided by an unseen force, remained planted on the marble floor. "I apologize for the intrusion," the prince said, his voice as smooth and comforting as a polished stone. "But I haven't seen you at court before. You must be new to the kingdom." "I am," she replied, her voice soft but clear. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to lie but needing to protect her secret. "My family is not of the court." The prince smiled, a genuine, warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That is the most refreshing thing I have heard all night. May I have this dance?" As he led her onto the dance floor, she felt a shift. He was a skilled dancer, but he moved with a grace that was more like a craftsman than a soldier. He didn't just go through the motions. He was truly present, his focus solely on her. They began to talk. The prince spoke of his duties, but also of his secret passions, drawing schematics for new inventions and the beauty of a well-tended garden. Elara, in turn, found herself opening up to him. She spoke of her love for weaving, the feel of the thread between her fingers, and how she could tell a story with a simple tapestry. He listened intently, his eyes alight with fascination. "You speak of your craft with such passion," he said as the waltz came to a close. "It is a rare thing to find in a world that values status more than skill. I must know your name." Elara's mind raced. What could she tell him? She could not say her real name. The tiny silver bird from the loom seemed to whisper an idea into her ear. "They call me Silver," she said, thinking of the threads of her gown. "Silver?" the prince repeated, a smile playing on his lips. "It suits you. I hope you will grace me with another dance." Elara's heart fluttered. She felt as though she had found a true friend, someone who saw her not as a servant or a noble, but as herself. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt seen. But as she looked toward the vast windows, she saw the first hint of gray light in the night sky. The stars were beginning to fade. A pang of fear shot through her. The little silver bird perched on a sconce high on the wall gave a frantic chirp. The magic was running out. She had to leave. Now. "I must go," Elara said, her voice a rush of panic. The words tumbled out of her mouth, and she pulled her hand away from the prince's. He looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Go? The night is still young, Silver. The feast has barely begun." "I can't explain," she stammered, her gaze darting toward the window where the sky was turning a soft pre-dawn gray. The magical glow of her dress seemed to dim slightly, and she felt a prickle of alarm. The tiny silver bird that had been watching her from a high-up perch suddenly swooped down, fluttering frantically around her head. The prince, seeing her distress, put a comforting hand on her arm. "Is everything all right? Please don't leave. I feel like I've finally found someone." "I am so sorry, my prince," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I have to go. Please, you must understand." She turned and began to run, her graceful movements from moments before now a frantic, clumsy flight. The prince called after her, but she didn't stop. She pushed past the astonished nobles and sped toward the grand staircase. The magic was unraveling. The delicate slippers she wore felt heavy and cumbersome. Her dress no longer sparkled with starlight but felt like a normal, albeit beautiful, piece of fabric. Just as she reached the top of the grand staircase, she caught a glimpse of her stepmother and stepsisters who were pointing in her direction, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She ducked her head and ran faster. One of her slippers, no longer held in place by magic, slipped from her foot. It bounced twice on the cold marble steps, its embroidery catching the last of the candlelight before it came to a rest on a lower landing. She knew she couldn't stop to get it. Her heart was in her throat. She had to get back to the cottage before her stepfamily returned. She burst through the massive doors and raced down the steps, her carriage of doves waiting for her. She leaped inside, and they took to the air just as the first rays of sunlight touched the spires of the castle. Below her, the prince stood on the steps, his chest heaving, a look of profound loss on his face. He had followed her, but he was too late. All he found was the lone, delicate slipper sitting on the cold stone. He picked it up, feeling the intricate embroidery and the soft leather. It was so small, so perfect. It was the only clue to the identity of the mysterious woman he had fallen for. Back in her cottage, Elara scrambled out of her transformed clothes just as the magic fully dissipated. Her beautiful dress turned back into the old worn cloth she had been mending. The carriage became a pile of old lumber, and the doves became two normal plump pigeons who cooed quietly. She was just in time. She quickly tidied herself and grabbed a broom, her heart still pounding with a mix of exhilaration and despair. She had danced with a prince, shared her heart with him, and now it was all just a memory, a fleeting, beautiful dream. She was just a simple weaver's daughter again, but her heart was now filled with a secret hope. The sun rose over the kingdom of Ethelgard, but for Crown Prince Alaric, the world felt like it had been plunged into shadow. The grand ballroom, which had been a place of joy just hours before, now seemed empty and hollow. He stood alone on the castle steps, clutching the delicate slipper in his hand. It was the only proof that his mysterious silver had been real, not a figment of his imagination. He had never felt so drawn to a person, and her sudden disappearance left a void in his heart. He knew he couldn't simply let her go. He felt a deep, almost instinctual connection to the woman who had understood his love for creation and his desire to build a better kingdom. She wasn't like the other noble ladies who only spoke of silks and court gossip. She was different, and he had to find her. The prince called for his most trusted advisor, Sir Calin. "I want you to take this slipper," he said, holding it out to the elderly knight. "You will travel to every corner of the kingdom, to every town and village. You will find the woman whose foot fits this shoe. Do not leave a single stone unturned." Sir Calin, who had served the royal family for decades, was surprised by the prince's urgency. He had never seen his usually composed and thoughtful prince so distraught. "As you command, my prince," he said, taking the slipper carefully. "I will not rest until I find her." And so began a great search. Sir Calin, accompanied by a small retinue of guards, traveled from one end of the kingdom to the other. They visited grand manors and humble cottages. They saw the feet of 1,000 women, some small and delicate, others broad and calloused. The slipper, however, seemed to belong to no one. The noble women, hearing of the prince's quest, were desperate to prove they were the one. They tried to squeeze their feet into the tiny slipper, wincing in pain as they pushed and shoved, but it was no use. The shoe was too perfect, too unique to be forced. Weeks turned into a month. Sir Calin and his men grew weary. The people of the kingdom began to whisper that the prince's mystery woman was just a ghost, a myth. Even Alaric began to feel a sliver of doubt creep into his heart. He would sit in his study, looking at the drawings he had made for new bridges and buildings, and he would think of her, the woman who had understood his dreams. He would look at the lone slipper, sitting on a velvet cushion on his desk, and his hope would flicker. The search was about to be called off when Sir Calin, out of a sense of duty, decided to visit the one area he had not yet explored, the quiet, unassuming town of Silverwood, known for its weavers. He had heard it was a place of simple folk, not the kind of people who would be invited to a royal gala. But a command was a command. He told his men they would visit every home in the town, no matter how small. He would fulfill his promise to his prince, even if it led to a dead end. Do you want to continue the story and find out if Sir Calin will finally find Alara? The cobblestone streets of Silverwood were quiet as Sir Calin and his guards rode into town. The air smelled of wet earth and freshly spun wool. It was a world away from the gilded halls of the castle, a place of honest labor and simple lives. Sir Calin felt a strange sense of peace here, a feeling of rightness that had been missing from his long journey. They went from door to door, the delicate slipper in a velvet bag, but the results were the same. The shoe simply did not fit. As they were about to leave the town, a town guard pointed them toward a small cottage on the outskirts. "My daughters are the most beautiful, most refined ladies in all of Silverwood. It is surely meant for one of them." She shooed Sir Calin and his men into the modest parlor, calling loudly for Greta and Agnes. The two girls rushed down, preening and giggling, their faces flushed with excitement. They had heard whispers of the prince's search, but they never dreamed it would lead to their door. "Greta, you first," Helga instructed, her voice syrupy sweet. "Show the sir your delicate foot." Greta sat on a chair and extended her foot, which was large and rather bony. Sir Calin carefully removed the slipper from its bag. The sight of the shoe's intricate embroidery and delicate leather made the guards whisper in awe. Greta tried to force her foot inside, pushing and shoving with all her might. She grimaced, her face turning red from the effort. It was no use, the shoe would not budge past her toes. "You must have a swollen foot from all your dancing," Helga said dismissively. "Agnes, you try now." Agnes, whose foot was even wider than her sister's, tried next. She puffed and huffed, pushing with her whole body, but the slipper was far too small. The leather did not yield. "How strange," Helga said, her smile faltering. "They are the most petite feet in the family. It must be a mistake. The slipper is simply too small for any woman of quality." She gave a pointed look at the guards as if to say the slipper was the problem, not her daughter's feet. Sir Calin sighed, a wave of disappointment washing over him. He was about to thank them and leave, when he saw a shadow move in the corner of the room. He saw a young woman with a broom in her hand, her face smudged with soot, watching them from the back of the room. She was wearing simple patched clothes, but her eyes held a spark of intelligence and a flicker of sadness he had seen in no one else. "Helga," Sir Calin said, his voice quiet but firm, "Do you have any other daughters?" Helga gasped, her face going pale. She turned to look at Alara, a look of pure dread in her eyes. "Her? Oh no, she is not my daughter. She's just a servant, a scullery maid. She couldn't possibly be the one." She tried to block Alara from view, but it was too late. The prince's knight had seen her. Helga's protest fell on deaf ears. Sir Kalin, an old and wise man, saw through her desperate attempt to hide the girl. He had seen the way Alara's eyes held a quiet sadness and a hidden strength. He strode toward her, the other guards following his lead. "Young lady," Sir Kalin said, his voice gentle, "would you please be so kind as to try on this slipper?" Alara's heart hammered in her chest. A small rebellious spark of hope flickered within her. She knew the slipper was hers, a piece of the magical night that she had held in her memory. Helga and her daughters looked on with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Sir, she is a servant!" Helga shrieked. "Her feet are calloused and dirty from a life of scrubbing. You are insulting the prince's quest." "Be silent," Sir Kalin commanded, his patience wearing thin. He motioned for Alara to sit. Alara, her hands trembling, sat on the small wooden stool. She wiped her foot clean with a corner of her apron. The sight of her bare foot, so different from the pampered feet of the other girls, made Helga and her daughters sneer. With a deep breath, Alara reached for the slipper. The moment her fingers touched the delicate embroidered leather, a jolt of recognition ran through her. This was the shoe from that night. Her shoe, a piece of the magic her father's loom had given her. She slid her foot into the slipper and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. The leather molded to her foot, the embroidery feeling like a familiar friend. A gasp rippled through the room. The guards stared in awe. Helga and her daughters looked as though they had seen a ghost. They had seen Alara every day in her simple rags, and never once considered that she could be the mysterious woman who had captured the prince's heart. Sir Kalin's face broke into a broad smile. "It's you," he said, relief and triumph in his voice. "The prince has been searching for you far and wide." Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She stood, the single slipper on her foot, and looked at her stepfamily. They stood in stunned silence, their faces pale with shock and rage. Helga was the first to speak. "This is a mistake," she sputtered. "The prince would never choose someone so common. She has tricked you. She must have a matching slipper hidden somewhere." Alara, her voice steady and clear, looked at Sir Kalin. "There is no other slipper, my lord. The magic of my father's loom created this for me for one night only. I am the weaver's daughter. I was simply a girl who wished to attend a ball, and my family's craft granted my wish." She then explained her story to the knight, speaking of her father's skill and the cruel twist of fate that had turned her into a servant in her own home. Sir Kalin listened intently, his expression one of great sympathy. When she was finished, he looked at Helga and her daughters with a cold, unforgiving glare. "You will not speak another word. This girl is the one we have been searching for. She is the woman who danced with our prince." He bowed to Alara, a deep, respectful bow. "Lady," he said, using the title that was now rightfully hers, "I am honored to tell my prince that I have found you. He will be here for you in the morning." Alara could only nod, her mind reeling. The long months of loneliness and hardship seemed to melt away. The loom, her father's legacy, had not only given her a magical night but had brought her a new life, a life she had never dared to dream of. The sun rose over the hills of Silverwood, casting a golden light on the old weaver's cottage. Alara woke before dawn, not to a list of chores but to the sound of hooves and the glimmer of steel. Looking out the window, she saw a magnificent sight. Crown Prince Alaric himself had arrived, accompanied by a small but distinguished retinue. His face was a mixture of hope and trepidation. Helga and her daughters, who had stayed up all night in a state of agitated disbelief, rushed to the door. They tried to present themselves as the lady of the house, but their efforts were futile. The prince's eyes scanned the cottage, ignoring their empty chatter until they landed on Alara. She stood in the doorway of the workshop, a quiet dignity about her that made her simple patched dress seem as elegant as the finest court gown. He dismounted and walked toward her. When he reached her, his gaze was fixed on her face, on the same kind eyes he remembered from the gala. He looked at her bare feet and then at the single slipper, which Sir Kalin held on a velvet cushion. "It is you," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of profound relief and emotion. "Silver. I knew it was you." Alara's heart swelled with happiness. "My name is Alara, my prince," she said softly. He smiled, a genuine, heart-stirring smile that was even more beautiful than she remembered. "Hilara," he repeated as if tasting the name. "It's a beautiful name. I have been searching for you for what feels like an eternity." Helga, in a final, desperate act, stepped forward. "My prince, this is an outrage. This girl is a servant. She has no place at court. She is lying about her family and her heritage." The prince's expression hardened. He looked at Helga with a cold, direct gaze that made her shrink back. "I was not looking for a family name or a title," he said. "I was looking for the woman who spoke of art, of creating, of love for her craft. I was looking for the person who sees the world not just for what it is, but for what it can be. Ilara, I believe, is that person." He then turned to Ilara, took her hand gently and knelt before her. The gesture was so grand, so unexpected that it brought tears to her eyes. "Ilara, the weaver's daughter," he said, "you have shown me that true nobility lies not in blood, but in a kind heart and a creative soul. I found a piece of my own soul in you at the gala. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife and sharing my life, my kingdom, and my dreams?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. She was just a simple weaver's daughter, standing in a worn-out dress. Yet the man who would one day rule the kingdom of Ethelgard was kneeling before her, asking for her hand in marriage. "Yes, my prince," she whispered. "Yes." He rose, and with his arm around her shoulders, he led her away from the cottage. Helga and her daughters watched them go, their faces ashen with defeat. The prince and Ilara left the past behind, their eyes fixed on a future filled with love, compassion, and a shared dream of a kingdom reborn. Ilara and Prince Alaric were married in a ceremony that was as grand as it was heartfelt. The people of Ethelgard, having heard the story of the weaver's daughter, flocked to the castle to witness the union of their prince and the mysterious woman who had captured his heart. Ilara, dressed in a gown of woven silk and embroidered with motifs of her father's craft, walked down the aisle not as a princess, but as herself. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a shared vision. Ilara, now Queen Ilara, did not forget her roots. She used her position to establish a guild for weavers and other artisans, ensuring that all skilled craftspeople, no matter their social standing, were given the chance to learn and thrive. Her kindness and compassion, combined with Alaric's just and forward-thinking leadership, transformed the kingdom. The rivers that once sang of simple melodies now hummed with the joyful sounds of flourishing industry and bustling trade. The old weaver's cottage on the outskirts of Silverwood was preserved. It was not a monument to her humble beginnings, but a reminder of the magic that can be found in a simple act of love and the power of one's own hands. Helga and her daughters, humbled by Ilara's success and no longer able to live off her kindness, were forced to find honest work to support themselves. They learned slowly and painfully that true worth came from labor and character, not from inherited wealth or status. One afternoon, many years later, Ilara and Alaric, now a king and queen beloved by their people, walked hand in hand through the royal gardens. They watched their children play, their laughter ringing out in the sunshine. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't left your slipper?" Alaric asked, a nostalgic smile on his face. Ilara smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "I think the magic would have found a way, my love. It was in the loom, in the love of my father, and in my heart all along. The slipper was just a piece of the puzzle. The real magic, I think, was you finding me, a simple weaver's daughter, and seeing not what I was, but who I was meant to be." And so, they ruled the kingdom of Ethelgard with justice and love, their story becoming a legend woven into the very fabric of the land. They proved to their people and to the world that a true monarch's power comes not from their crown, but from the good they do for their people, and that the greatest riches are found not in gold, but in a heart full of compassion.